Wow, what a turnout! I guess the themes we chose for tonight really struck a chord with all of you. Every time Jamie Raskin is in the store, I always like to ask how many here are from Jamie's district. I don't know if you can see that, Jamie. There's a lot of overlap of supporters. Good evening. Welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, who's seated over there. And we are very, very excited to be holding what we're calling our first teach-in of 2025. Now, looking at this audience, I can tell that a number of you are old enough to recall the teach-ins of the 1960s. That they provided a foundation for education and tools for action during the civil rights and anti-war movements. And back in 2017, after Donald Trump first assumed the presidency, P&P held our own teach-ins to help inform then about relevant issues and advise on ways to remain engaged. Now, with anxieties and concerns again running high, we've revived the teach-in idea to serve the same purpose as before. An event like this is somewhat of a departure from P&P's normal programming, which is focused on author talks. But it is very much in keeping with the fundamental mission of Politics and Prose and lots of other independent bookstores in the United States. And that mission is simply to cultivate a sense of community and to strengthen the common good through not just promoting books, but also through fostering a respectful exchange of ideas. And central to that mission is a commitment to certain values, among them independence, diversity, and freedom of expression. This evening's discussion will examine the recent challenges to individual rights and liberties and to the rule of law posed by a number of Trump's actions since the inauguration. Future teach-ins will address other themes, and we're asking all of you here this evening to help us pick those topics by filling out a brief survey, which you should have received, at least many of you, when you arrived. Many thanks to all of you for coming, and to those of you watching live on C-SPAN or on P&P's own live stream link. We're grateful also to our panelists, who will be out here in a second, each of whom brings considerable expertise and experience to this evening's agenda. Moderating will be Ali Cole, an assistant professor of law at the City University of New York, where she teaches on the constitutional separation of powers, the modern administrative state, and the federal court system. Ali also has been a litigator in private practice and spent time on Capitol Hill as an aide in both the House and the Senate. She'll be introducing the panelists, so panelists, come on out.
Wow, thank you, Brad, and thanks so much to everybody for coming out. This is so energizing to see a room full of people here for what I know will be an incredible discussion. Before I dive in, we're so lucky to be joined by some of the nation's leading experts who are working on the front lines in this critical moment in our nation's political history, and we will have a chance for you all to ask questions toward the end of the program. We have 2 microphones here at the front, and I will let you know when we are getting close to the time for questions, and you can come up and ask your questions at the microphones. I would just ask that you hold your questions for that time in the program so we can make the most of this conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our amazing group of panelists. David Cole is the Honorable George J. Mitchell, Professor in Law and Public Policy at Georgetown University Law Center. He's also the former National Legal Director of the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. Yeah. He is the author of 10 books, at least one of which I know we have here in the store for purchase tonight. That's Engines of Liberty, How Citizen Movements Succeed. Very on topic for our conversation tonight. And he has won many awards, too many for me to list, for his work on civil liberties and has litigated several critical cases before the Supreme Court, which we'll talk more about in the program tonight. Skye Perryman is the president and CEO of Democracy Forward, which is, yes, sounds like many of you are familiar with the organization, but it is a national, nonpartisan legal organization that is working at the front lines of holding the Trump administration accountable in the courts. Under Skye's leadership, Democracy Forward has filed 25 legal actions, probably more at this point since I got that number, just since January 20th, and has brought together a unique coalition of more than 400 organizations, securing major wins and addressing the impact of this administration's policies on the American people. Congressman Jamie Raskin represents Maryland's 8th district in the United States House of Representatives, where I was lucky to grow up. And he is also the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee and led the House impeachment proceeding during Trump's second impeachment trial. Previously, Congressman Raskin was a 3-term state senator in Maryland, where he also served as majority whip. And he also taught constitutional law for more than 25 years just down the road from here at American University Washington College of Law. And Kelly Robinson is a pioneering LGBTQ+ and social justice advocate, and she's the first Black queer woman to run the Human Rights Campaign. The Human Rights Campaign, for those of you who don't already know it, is the largest LGBTQ+ organization in the United States. And as President, Kelly has overseen the mobilization of more than 3 million people to respond to what was already a surge in anti-LGBTQ+ legislation and obviously additional recent executive actions as well. She previously was the executive director of Planned Parenthood Action Fund, where she worked on reproductive justice. And if that all wasn't impressive enough, she was also named last year as one of Time Magazine's most 100 influential people of 2024. So let's dive into our conversation. David, I'm going to start with you. Believe it or not, it has only been just a little over 6 weeks since Trump was sworn in to his second term in office, and yet so much has happened in that time. But as we've discussed, that is intentional to some degree, right? It's a part of the administration's strategy to, quote unquote, flood the zone. And amidst all this frenzy of activity, though, there are a few key themes that have emerged, most notably around who this administration is targeting. Immigrants, for one, the LGBTQ+ community, with a particular focus on transgender individuals, for another, perhaps others that you would identify as well. So why is this administration, do you think, targeting these individuals and groups in particular? And as someone who's worked on civil liberties for your whole career, which of the executive actions we've seen so far are most troubling to you and why?
So thank you. First of all, let me thank Politics and Prose for doing this. 4 years ago, I had just started as the legal director, or no, 8 years ago, I had just started as the legal director for the ACLU right before Trump took office, and we did the first session like this, 8 years ago, and it was, packed to the door. And as I was walking over here tonight, I thought, well, if it's not packed, we're screwed. So thank you all for coming. We are not screwed. I think, as I see the Trump strategy, it's really a twofold strategy. It is target the vulnerable and neutralize the opposition. So the targeting of the vulnerable is going after immigrants, transgender folks, and DEI, which is a stand-in for people of color. And those are minorities. They play to his base. It is easy to go after them. It calls to mind a quote that Lewis Post said about the Palmer raids of 1919, when there was a series of bombings in the United States, and the United States went out under J. Edgar Hoover and rounded up thousands of immigrants based on virtually nothing. And after the fact, Lewis Post, who overturned a lot of those decisions, wrote that the delirium caused by the bombings turned in the direction of a deportation crusade like water seeking out the course of least resistance. This is the course of least resistance. You go after the vulnerable, they can't fight back. And so that's what he's doing. He's playing to the base. But you also need to neutralize the opposition. And this is what authoritarians do when they take power. They seek to neutralize those forces that can check their power. So he's neutralized the Republican Party, and so Congress is not a meaningful check, but he has to neutralize the rest of civil society. And so he's gone after the media, he's gone after universities, as you've seen with the letter to Georgetown Law School Dean just earlier this week, and the taking $400 million of funding from Columbia today. He's gone after the legal profession. He's punished Covington and Burling and Perkins Coie basically because they represented the Democratic Party in legitimate lawsuits that he didn't like. And he's fired the inspectors general, and he's put his loyalists in all the key positions of law enforcement and the military. So he's lined it up pretty well. And that is the playbook. That's the playbook that Viktor Orban and many others have used in the past. I think the difference in this country is that civil society is strong. The fact that all of you are here is an illustration of that. We are not cowed. We are speaking out. And if we do that, as we did the last time, then we will check many of the abuses that he has engaged in. So, at the end of the day, it turns on us, but I have a tremendous faith in the strength of American civil society, and groups like Democracy Forward and Human Rights Campaign and the ACLU and Public Citizen and all these organizations that are standing up and filing lawsuit after lawsuit challenging what he's doing and mobilizing people to do so. That's where my faith lies.
Great. That's very encouraging to hear. So Kelly, in my question to David, I framed these attacks as being on different groups of people, immigrants and the LGBTQ plus community. But as someone who's worked on social justice movements your whole career, that's not how this really works in reality, right? We all have multiple overlapping identities, and these attacks and the problems they're causing are intersectional problems that need to be addressed as such. So how are you in the Human Rights Campaign approaching this moment and making sure we're addressing these issues through an intersectional lens?
Yeah, absolutely. And I, too, have to thank everyone for being here tonight. Talk about a poppin' Friday night in D.C. Yes. And I also want to say this. For anyone that says the resistance is not alive, for anyone that says that people aren't pissed off and showing up, I need them to know that rooms like this with people like us are happening all across this country. This is who we are. And And David, I will say, when you, my heart kind of dropped when you said the reason that they attack these communities is because it is a path of least resistance. And I think our fundamental job is to ensure that it is not. And for me, especially when I see these attacks playing out, whether it's against the trans community, immigrant communities trying to roll back DEI, it's very clear that they're not coming for one of us, they're coming for all of us. And what they're trying to do is dismantle the civil rights infrastructure that's been built over the last 60 years in this country. And I think the thing that we all have to understand is, especially when I think about the trans community, one of the challenges I think we have right now is that only 30% of people believe that they know a trans person, right? Only 30%. More people believe that they've seen a ghost. And as humorous as it is, it's also dangerous because what they're using is that lack of familiarity to sow fear and chaos at a time when we need to be leading with empathy and curiosity. So our task, thank you. Our task is to really make it clear that our fates are intertwined. And for me, as a Black queer woman, it is so clear that every horrific thing they're saying about the trans community right now, they've said it about all of us before. 30 years ago, they were saying the same things about lesbian, gay, and bi people, and we fought back, and now the Respect for Marriage Act is the law of the land, right? 40 years ago, they said the same things about people living with HIV and AIDS. And because we did not give up, now we're still within arm's reach of ending the epidemic in our lifetime, in this generation. I mean, the same things they're saying about trans people today. 100 years ago, they said about Black women. I'm sitting here at a panel at Politics and Prose tonight, okay? So I say all that to say that for me, intersectionality, it's not a theory that's out in the world. It's about how we practice this together and understand that our fates are fundamentally intertwined. And in this moment, I think that we have the chance to do something profound. We're on the precipice of creating a real movement that's multicultural, multiracial, multidimensional in ways that could be powerful. And sometimes I think in the midst of the crises that are in front of us, it actually gives us a chance to transform the movement in the way that it has always needed to be transformed. So as challenging as this moment is, I think it's a real call for clarity around what intersectionality in practice looks like and means. It's a call for accountability to make sure that the rooms that we're in reflect all of our communities. And it's an opportunity for us to evolve at a moment that we desperately need to because our lives are on the line. So at the Human Rights Campaign, we're taking that charge every single day and putting it into action.
I love that framing of, these really challenging moments as also opportunities to rethink how we're doing things. So thank you for that. Speaking of the topic of resistance and how do we create it so that it's not the path of least resistance, Skye, you and Democracy Forward have been using the courts as a key mechanism for creating some of that resistance. It's something we saw happen successfully during the first Trump administration and already now. Just 2 weeks ago, Democracy Forward secured a court ruling blocking some key parts of the anti-DEI executive order, and I know you've also used litigation to great effect in other areas like protecting the civil service and blunting some of the attacks against the administrative state. So how are you using litigation to try to create some resistance in this moment?
Well, I first of all, thank you all again for being a packed house. This is so inspirational to those of us that are doing this every day. Look, the courts are a major check right now. We have 3 branches of government. We'll talk to Congressman Raskin about what his colleagues on the other side of the aisle are doing, but Congress has not been checking this executive branch. The executive branch is not going to check itself, and people that think they're going to keep their head down and some sort of, talk them into sense, I don't think that's going to work. And so that leaves the courts as a huge front line in the work to protect people and communities across the country, and at the same time to slow, disrupt, and expose what is happening. So we have filed a number of lawsuits. In some of those lawsuits, we and others, our partners at so many organizations and our state AGs that are also filing a number of suits, have been able to win court orders that are changing people's lives. We stopped the federal funding freeze, which you might want to call a federal funding freeze, but what it was an essential services freeze, where people woke up and didn't know if they were going to get Meals on Wheels, or if they were going to be able to take their kids to Head Start, or how their small business was going to get the credit they needed. That's what they were trying to freeze overnight. And we were able to get into court and stop that, and the courts have continued to extend those orders. We've been able to stop for religious communities, ICE coming into houses of worship and conducting operations in houses of worship that no president, whether Republican or Democrat, for the last 30 years has allowed, because it's an offense to our Constitution. So we've been able to win those types of victories, and others have too, that really change people's lives and slow things down. But we've also been able to use the courts as an exposure tactic. So DOGE, this so-called Department of Government Efficiency, everybody's about efficiency, but you don't get efficiency when you fire all the inspector generals whose job it is to root out corruption and inefficiency and waste and fraud and abuse. So we know that what this is a farce, and we and others have filed a number of lawsuits, and in those lawsuits, the courts, in some instances, have slowed DOGE down and stopped them, and in other instances have said, you know, we need to learn more, and so they've ordered discovery against this, which is a tool that we have to be able to ask questions, to be able to inform the public, and in doing that, it's not just about securing the court ruling, although we will continue to secure those, and I guarantee you we will, and so will our partners every single day continue to fight in the courts. But it's also about forcing some public accountability, and it goes back to what Professor Cole said around civil society and how we can all respond, and how the courts can really be used as a mechanism not just to protect our rights, but also to help inform us and to help make us more informed about how we can hold our lawmakers accountable. So we are viewing the courts as a front line. I'm happy to take questions. I know others will be about, like, what happens if they don't follow court orders. There's all those types of questions, but the courts are really holding. There's been about 100 cases filed so far. We have won nationwide injunctions, as have many others, to protect people and communities, and we're going to continue to do that every single day.
And Congressman Raskin, I know you've been doing a lot of thinking about the role of the courts in this truth-serving function, and they do play this critical role of not only issuing the law, but also in establishing the truth and making sure that the parties who come before it represent the truth. And perhaps partly because of the success Guy and others have been having at blocking some of the Trump administration's early priorities in the courts, the federal judiciary has become under attack as well as an institution, and we've seen both President Trump and Vice President Vance start questioning the legitimacy of the institution. In fact, recently, Vice President Vance posted on X that judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. But of course, it is a role of the courts, right? You're a constitutional law professor, to check the executive's power. You're also sitting in another check on the executive's power in Congress, and yet we've also seen the administration start to encroach on that traditional role by freezing funding that Congress has appropriated and trying to illegally dismantle agencies like USAID and Department of Education that you created by statute. So from your perspective as both a member of Congress and as someone who taught constitutional law for more than 25 years,
you keep rubbing that in, Ellie.
yeah, so how unprecedented is this moment? And do you think our constitutional system of checks and balances is working as intended right now?
All right, well, if I could start with one or 2 points of personal privilege, and then I'll come right to your question. One is, can anybody give me a ride back home to Tacoma Park when this is over? Because, okay, all right. Because my trusty assistant, she's been working 80 hours this week, and she had a plan to go meet her friends for dinner, and the people who were going to drive me back, they couldn't find a place to park, and so I did. So anyway, thank you. So somebody find me after, if you would. The second point, Bradley, thank you so much for convening us, and Lissa, and I'm very delighted to be part of the program, because it's a moment of profound urgency for all of us, but also I've got another reason, which is that, Bradley referenced the teach-in movement of the 1960s, and my dad, who I think a few people here must have known, Marcus Raskin, he wrote the book for the teach-in movement called The Vietnam Reader, which they used at the teach-ins around the country. I don't think I ever got to one as a little boy, but now's my chance to be part of the new teaching movement. So thank you for starting it. Well, let me start with that point about judicial review. Of course, that tweet was worded in a kind of diabolically clever way. Of course, you can't contradict the idea that if it's a legitimate power, it can't be interfered with, but it implies that it's limitless or infinite legitimate power, which is just ridiculous. I mean, that's what Marbury versus Madison was all about in 1803. It's emphatically the province and the duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. And, I mixed it up with my counterpart, Jim Jordan, on the Judiciary Committee, where he's saying, well, not if it's a question of a subordinate replying to the president. And I just said, go back and read Marbury versus Madison. Madison wasn't the president. He was the Secretary of State reporting to Thomas Jefferson. And the Supreme Court established, I think it was in Headnote 9, I just looked it up, where the court said that the judicial department absolutely has the authority to tell someone in the executive branch, in this case Madison, to deliver a judicial commission to somebody who had rightfully received it, even if the president is saying don't deliver it. So that's exactly the situation we're in with all of these subordinates, including Elon Musk, who might not like to think of himself as a subordinate, but all of them, if they have any authority, it comes from the president of the United States. So so Jordan is running around on TV saying, well, Article 2 says the executive power is vested in the President of the United States, and that settles it. But it doesn't tell you what the executive power is, okay? So look at the structure of the Constitution, and this is the teach-in part of the proceedings I really like, okay? Because it allows me to play constitutional law professor again. Because, look, we had a revolution against a king. We overthrew a monarch. In the Articles of Confederation, we didn't even have a president. It was just the Congress, but that wasn't perfectly effective or efficient, so the presidency was created. But look at the structure of the Constitution. Starts with the preamble, right? We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and preserve to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of liberty, do hereby ordain and establish the Constitution of these United States of America. The very next sentence, it's thrilling, isn't it? But the very next sentence establishes Article 1 and the sovereign power of the people to create the Constitution in the country flows immediately where? Into Congress. All legislative power is vested in the Congress of the United States. Then it goes on for pages and pages about what the powers of Congress are: to regulate commerce domestically and internationally, to pass the budget, to declare war, to govern the seat of government. And even in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, and all other powers necessary and proper to the execution of the foregoing powers. You get through all of that, then you get to Article 2, right? 4 short paragraphs. One of them, the biggest one, is all about how you impeach a president, okay, for treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. And by the way, don't buy that 6th grade civics dogma that we have 3 co-equal branches. First of all, co-equal is not even a word, okay? And secondly, we're not equal. If we were equal, why do we have the power to impeach, try, and convict the president if he doesn't have the power to impeach, try, and convict us? Because the framers believed much more in the power and the wisdom of the group, the collective, than of one person who they understood could go off and become a mad, deranged, and dangerous king. They understood that perfectly well. So what's the president's job? What is the core of the president's job? Very simple. After being commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy in times of actual conflict, what's the core of the job? To take care that the laws are faithfully executed. To take care that the laws are faithfully executed, not distorted and warped and ravaged and trashed and thrown away. So Donald Trump, somebody tell him, take care that the laws are faithfully executed. That's your job. And by the way, An Appropriations Act is a law, is a federal law, like a law which says you can't assault federal officers. That's what an Appropriations Act is. It's not a budgetary recommendation. It's not a suggestion. It's not an opening bargaining chip in a negotiation. It's a law. Follow the law. Spend the money as Congress tells you to spend the money. Okay? And Sky, they're winning on these cases, on Congress's spending power, on the power of the purse that we've got, and that they must follow through. And we just won that in the AID case in the Supreme Court for $2 billion. I mean, it's shocking that that was a 5-4 decision instead of a 9-0 decision. It tells you what treacherous waters we're in. But let's hear it for Amy Coney Barrett standing up for the Constitution. And we've got the power of oversight. To me, it's the most humiliating thing in the world to see James Comer and Jim Jordan, who's on the Oversight Committee, and I was the ranking member on Oversight, but to see all these people whose job it is to go out and ferret out waste, fraud, and abuse, cheering when they've created this monstrous fourth branch of government that doesn't obey the Constitution or the rule of law or anything, and they say, great job. Well, why don't you do your job, okay? If you think, you know, the first thing they did when they got in was they sacked all the inspectors general. 18 inspectors general have been fired. Their job is to fight waste, fraud, and abuse, and they really do it. They've got huge teams of people. This is painstaking work that they do in every department of the government. And they don't do that work by showing up with a bunch of juvenile computer hackers. They do it by coming with forensic accountants, budget analysts, and they go through what the departments are really working on, and they find the waste, fraud, and abuse, $91 billion last year. And they got rid of those people. They're not interested in fighting corruption. They're not opponents of corruption. They are instruments and agents of corruption throughout the government. It's very clear. So anyway, well, we're going to have to vindicate the lawmaking, the spending, and the oversight powers of the Congress of the United States. And the president's job is to take care of the laws are faithfully executed. They've got their big unitary executive theory that they're pushing, which is why they sacked the Democratic members of the Federal Election Commission and the Securities Exchange Commission and the National Labor Relations Board. And that person was just reinstated today, I think, the NLRB. We are winning in court every day. We are winning these cases because of the Article III branch who are willing to do their job. But I'll tell you this, we had several hours of a markup session yesterday where they're bringing all these bills forward to try to undermine and undercut the courts. They were all for the courts when they were going to try to, you know, decapitate Joe Biden's college student loan forgiveness. They were all about judicial activism to knock down Biden. Now, here's some of the things that we looked at yesterday. They want to say that federal injunctions in constitutional cases no longer apply nationally. They only apply to the parties of the case. It'd be like if Brown versus Board of Education, the decision applied only to Linda Brown and the other plaintiffs in the case. I mean, it makes no sense at all. Meantime, they were all trekking to that reactionary theocrat judge in Texas, Kaczmarek, to get national injunctions under Joe Biden. But they want to say that you no longer can do that. But they're trying to pack the courts again. You know, we had an agreement with them before the election where we said, look, we will add new federal judges because there's a need for federal judges around the country. And then they refused to do it before the election. We said, let's do it now. Neither of us will know who is going to be president. So that's the only fair way to do it. We'll be in the Rawlsian original position with a veil of ignorance over us. They would not do it. Then as soon as the election was over, Jim Jordan said, we want to do it. We want to go in. And we said, no, like that's heads I win, tails you lose. We're not playing that game. So they now are basically trying to pack the court with their reactionary judges as fast as they can while they clip the wings of other judges who actually maintained fidelity to the Constitution. So it's very important. But I want to agree with what everybody else has said so far, which is the key factor here I mean, I put it this way. I view it in terms of short-term, medium-term, long-term. Short-term, the courts are essential. But also popular protest is essential to keep everybody's spirits up and to keep people engaged. And midterm, the great thing about our system of government, there's always another election coming. And in 2026, we've got to cut this reign of terror in half by winning back the House of Representatives and the Senate if we can. And then long term, there is a fork in the road, and it's not Elon's fork in the road. The fork in the road is between standing behind strong democracy and human rights and freedom all over the world, or getting on the side of the autocrats and the kleptocrats and the theocrats and the plutocrats. That's the fork in the road. And you can already see where Donald Trump wants to take us in terms of aligning with Vladimir Putin and Viktor Orban. And look at that vote against Ukraine in the United Nations, where US and Russia and Iran were all aligned against Zelensky, who Donald Trump has proceeded to call a dictator, which is just shocking. So that's the real fork in the road. Long term, that's the struggle we're in. So people say to me, and I know we're going to talk about this later, what do I do? The first thing you got to do is you got to take care of yourself and your families and your friends, because this is not a 2-day struggle or a 2-year struggle. This is the struggle of our lives. This is the fight of our lives we're in. So we need everybody to be in tip-top shape, and then we have to be in extremely close coordination and communication, as Kelly was saying. I mean, we need all to stand together. Solidarity is the watchword that's going to get us through this thing.
Well, now that I've got you going about the Constitution, I have one more question for you, which is related to what you just brought up, which is, of course, another important constitutional safeguard is the First Amendment, which is the First Amendment for a reason. And this moment makes clear why it is so important for us to be able to speak truth to power, as we are doing tonight, but also to be able to discern the truth in a moment where disinformation can spread so rapidly. So on this note of what we can all do, what advice do you have for people listening tonight about how we can keep speaking truth to power even when it might feel scary to do so, and also how we can discern fact from fiction in this moment in time?
So the political scientists tell us that the difference between the democracies that falter and buckle under right-wing coups and authoritarian attacks and those that are able to withstand it are popular protest, activism, and agitation. In other words, parliamentary or legislative tactics are absolutely necessary, but they are not remotely sufficient. And so it is not going to work just to do it in a legislative or parliamentary way. We need a society-wide rejection of authoritarianism. And so everybody's got to exercise their First Amendment rights, and we got to exercise our First Amendment rights in favor of the First Amendment. We do not ban words in America. You cannot kick reporters out of the White House because they call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of Mexico, okay? The equity and inclusion and diversity, these are not illegal words, okay? They are not unconstitutional words. DEI is not an unconstitutional concept. It may be a viewpoint that some people reject, but you can't ban it. I'm hearing from constituents who are in the armed services over in Germany, and they got a notice, which I put up online, a memo saying that the school library for the kids of people in the military was being closed for a week so they could go through the book catalog to comply with Donald Trump's executive order to get rid of books promoting gender ideology, whatever that is, and promoting equity ideology, whatever that is. I thought that was the Declaration of Independence equity ideology. People are going to have to stand up for basic First Amendment rights, and also on the religious side of things. I mean, this is a country that was created in a revolution against centuries of religious warfare between the Catholics and the Protestants in Europe, every bit as vicious as the wars between the Shia and the Sunni today. And it was a rebellion against witchcraft trials, Holy Inquisition, crusades, all of it. They wanted to reconstitute government on the basis of reason, not conspiracy theory and dogma. And yet this is what we're fighting every day on Capitol Hill. Somebody gets up. I saw a member get up and he says, the moral downfall of America was in 1962 in Engel versus Vitale when the Supreme Court banned prayer in the public schools. And I said, the Supreme Court never banned prayer in the public schools. As long as there are pop math quizzes, there will be prayer in the public schools. Anybody can pray whenever he or she wants to pray. It's just the government can't compel your children to pray in a way that's at odds with your family's belief system. But it just doesn't end. You saw Louisiana. Louisiana voted to endorse the Ten Commandments. And so, and to put up, the Ten Commandments everywhere. So, of course, my MAGA colleagues, they come in talking the next week, we've got to endorse the Ten Commandments. And I said, gee, the Ten Commandments have been doing fine for millennia without an endorsement by the Freedom Caucus in the House of Representatives. And no, they insist we got to go forward because, the Ten Commandments are the basis of the Bill of Rights, because it's 10 commandments and 10 amendments. And so, yes, of course, well, actually, the first commandment is thou shalt have no other God before me. The first amendment is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So no, that seems like a non sequitur to me. But anyway, they insist. And we go to the Rules Committee, and I go talk to my friend Jim McGovern, and I say, look, if we're going to vote on the 10 commandments, we should have to vote on each commandment separately, okay? And they shouldn't get away with that omnibus resolution. And you shouldn't be able to vote for any commandment you yourself have ever violated, because you'll be taking the name of the Lord in vain. So anyway, we can't put up with this nonsense. Too many people are being cowed and intimidated. And I'm seeing it every day with law firms, because of what David said about Perkins Coie and Covington Burling. We can't be afraid to speak back to this nonsense, the propaganda and the disinformation and the confusion that they want to teach children in America. Think about your kids and your grandchildren. Do you want them to grow up in an authoritarian, dogmatic society like that? Or are we going to hang on to the democracy that we know and move forward to enrich and expand our democracy, right? Because, we're here in a city. I'll close with this thought because I know I've got a lot of my wonderful constituents here from the 8th District, but I know there's a lot of people from Washington, D.C. here. And my colleagues talk all the time about how they're going to take over Washington, D.C. because they want this to be under the direct police power control jurisdiction of Donald Trump. One reason is just so they can get their friends out of jail. Already they're not prosecuting their friends. Of course, Donald Trump kicked this whole nightmare off by pardoning more than 1,500 insurrectionists, hundreds of people who violently assaulted our officers with Trump flags and steel pipes and broken furniture and so on. But they don't even want to wait until the charges are dropped. They don't even want anybody to be arrested. The chief of staff to Speaker Johnson got picked up after the joint session address on Tuesday because he got in his car and then he plowed into the back of a parked police car. So they tested him. He got picked up for DUI. But then, of course, they let him go. They didn't want to press charges. They don't even want the people to be arrested. And so they want control over the police in D.C., just like the prosecutors and so on. Whereas my motto now is no more DUI hires. Anyway, I'll pass it back to you.
Well, speaking truth to power is obviously on tap here tonight. And Kelly, as you know well, speaking truth to power is nothing new, right? And today is actually a very fitting day to be celebrating the right to and the need for protest because it's the 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, which is when civil rights activists, including the late John Lewis, marched from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama to protest the denial of voting rights for Black Americans and police brutality. And so, as someone who's worked on social justice movements your whole career, you know that this moment, it is in some ways unprecedented, but also in some ways we have been here before, not here literally, but, versions of here before. And I'm wondering if you can speak a bit to how we can draw from past civil rights movements and apply those lessons from history and our ancestors to make change in this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. But first I gotta say, that's my congressman, y'all. Yes! Yes! Wow. Okay, Professor Congressman. A couple things are resonating with me, especially after the congressman spoke. Yes, the people of this nation did elect Donald Trump as president, but they certainly did not elect him as king. And I think it's important that we remind ourselves of that, because right now what's happening is you have so many institutions that are obeying in advance with executive orders that are unlawful right now. Every time I see a company roll over on their diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, every time I hear about a school that's proactively taking measures to ban books that they don't have to, every time I hear about us relenting, it sickens me. Because the only thing standing between Donald Trump asserting his power as a king and that becoming our reality is good people like us in rooms like this saying, hell to the no. That's what we've got to continue to do every single day. And if I think back about the lessons from the past, there's a couple of things that resonate with me. One, when you confront institutions of power, when you confront an establishment that doesn't want you to have basic civil or human rights, it is not safe work. A lot of times I think, especially for some of my friends and colleagues, we talk a lot about our elders and our ancestors in this movement, from Bayard Rustin to Miss Major to Marsha P. Johnson, right, to John Lewis. But what we don't always talk about is that when they were fighting for rights, they did so at risk of losing their jobs, losing their families, and sometimes losing their lives too, but still they fought, and still they found ways to win. So in this moment, I think that there's something that we have to understand, that the work ahead may not be easy, and it certainly may not be safe. But if our democracy is worth fighting for, we got to get in the fight. You cannot stand on the sidelines when all of our rights are under attack. The other thing I don't think we talk about enough is that sometimes on the path to getting closer towards freedom and equality and justice, you're going to lose along the way. One of my dear friends and close mentors, she passed away recently. Her name was Cecile Richards. She was the president of Planned Parenthood for a long time. And she just had we had a memorial for her in DC just yesterday, actually. And it reminded me of this quote that she used to say a lot. She used to say, the nature of movements is that you lose, and then you win. But it's important to keep that movement going. And when I think about, the story of Selma and what it meant to march across that bridge on Bloody Sunday, that was a moment where they didn't make it all the way across the bridge. Because let's remember, a couple weeks later on March 25th, that's when they completed that march from Montgomery to Selma. But it was after Bloody Sunday and suffering a devastating defeat that dramatized the fight for civil rights for the nation. So I think in this moment about all the times that we have lost on our pathway to freedom and equality. I think about when the Defense of Marriage Act was the law of the land and how we never accepted that as a final word on our love, and still we fought in the LGBTQ plus community. I think about in the 80s when we lost a whole generation of men to that crisis, of gay men in that crisis, and still we fought forward because we knew our lives were worth fighting for. This is one of those moments where we are experiencing a devastating loss that is going to hurt and harm a lot of people, already has. But we have to remember that there is more on the other side that is available to us if we keep and continue the fight. And I don't know about y'all, but I've had this restored sense of patriotism lately, somewhere between Cowboy Carter and Kendrick Lamar at the Super Bowl, Something just transformed for me. And for me, I think that in this moment, we cannot be willing to give up on this country. I'm a patriot just as much as anybody else because I'm willing to fight for my nation. I'm willing to fight for my rights, and I'm willing to fight for my community. And for me, I feel like I'm living the legacy of James Baldwin, that when he said, I love my country so much, and that's why I criticize her relentlessly, because I know that she can be better for us all. So as much and as challenging as this moment that we are in is, I need us to remember that we are not without hope and we're not without power. And when we embrace that power and that courage, it becomes contagious. Look, courage is like glitter. If there's any gays in the room, you know that if you get glitter on you, it ain't coming off, right? And we got to spread it that way. Like when Bishop Bundy spoke truth to power to Donald Trump, I was inspired that day. When Janet Mills told him, "I'll see you in court," people were inspired that day. Every time we stand up, it's not just for ourselves, it's for every young voice and every young person that's watching us to see, what are you willing to do in this moment? So I think this is one of those times where history is going to look back and ask us, when everything was on the line, what did you do? And as Cecile Richards, my mentor, would once say, she said, when that question comes to you, the only acceptable answer is everything that you could.
So adding to the idea of this progress that's not always obvious right in the moment, but comes along often maybe more slowly than we would like. David, you have litigated several landmark cases in times when civil liberties were under threat. For example, you helped extend First Amendment protections to flag burning. You helped litigate Bostock versus Clayton County, in which the Supreme Court recognized that sex discrimination under Title VII extends to people who are discriminated against because of their sexual orientation or gender identity or gender expression or for being transgender. And you've also secured a ruling that says the government can't use its power to coerce private parties into blacklisting disfavored political organizations. So what can we all do, as for those of us who are lawyers, but also for those of us who are non-lawyers in this moment to, as Kelly just so inspiringly motivated us to do, to stand up for these principles that motivate and define us as Americans, even when they might not be popular, right? And as was the case in so many of those cases that you litigated.
So thank you. I think I would say two things. One is, don't underestimate the ability of the Supreme Court to check Donald Trump. I think too often those on the left just condemn this court as, of course, it's just a right-wing court. It's going to let him do whatever he wants to do. After all, look, it gave him immunity from criminal prosecution even after he left office. It's hopeless. It's not hopeless. It's not hopeless. President Trump had the worst won-lost record in the Supreme Court of any president since the first term of FDR, when the court was overturning everything he did. And that was a court that was majority Republican and included people he appointed. His own justices have ruled against him numerous times. Since he won the election, he has gone up to the court 3 times for emergency relief. Once just before inauguration to try to avoid being sentenced as a multiple felon, and he lost. And then twice since he was inaugurated, appealing decisions from lower courts, and both times he lost. So don't count the court. Don't count the court out. The second, and I think because if we count the court out, well then the court may well just say, well, if one half the country has already counted us out, why should we stick our necks out? So don't count the court out, but also don't count on the court. Don't count on the court, right? You can't count on the court to do it itself. What you see when this book, the last book I wrote before I went to the ACLU, Engines of Liberty, is about how constitutional change happens. And the argument of the book is you can't understand how marriage equality was won by reading the briefs, by looking at the arguments, by looking at doctrine. What you have to look at is the work that all sorts of LGBT groups did around the country in different forums, on different issues, whether it was family law reform or getting non-discrimination ordinances to cover sexual orientation, or working in progressive cities to get them to extend protections to same-sex partners, to seeking constitutional reform at the state level before you went to the federal court. It was all that work which took all of us to change the landscape so that, in fact, that case could be won in the Supreme Court. And so, no, I don't think the Supreme Court reads the tea leaves and says, well, where are the people? But it's not ignorant of where the people are. And political scientists have shown that the court rarely departs company too far from where the people are on fundamental issues. So, it matters what they're seeing about where the people are. It matters if people stand up and speak out and resist, like the dean of Georgetown Law School did to Ed Martin just yesterday. Right, like the prosecutors in New York did in resigning rather than dismiss the case against Eric Adams. Right, those sorts of things make a difference, and it makes a difference if there are organizations like Democracy Forward and LDF and HRC and Lambda and the ACLU out there fighting, and they have a lot of people, supporting them. That makes a difference. It makes a difference if people are engaged on the ground in political actions to speak up. And so groups like Indivisible, which was founded right in some of you, I hope, are members of Indivisible, localized efforts by people who come together, started right after Trump was elected the first time, to fight for our civil liberties and civil rights. The ACLU has a people power, which is similarly a grassroots effort to mobilize people around these sorts of issues. So we all have to be in this fight, and there are many ways that we can be. Going to town halls. I recently seen a number of people have started going to town halls in red states with red state politicians and, calling them on what they're doing. And so some of the politicians have, I don't know if Jamie will confirm this, but some of the politicians said, well, let's not do town halls anymore if people are going to attack us. But the
whole Republican caucus said that. They said, yeah.
They can't not speak to the people, and we have to force them to speak to the people. And again, from last time, the one thing Trump said he would do and tried to do, I think 14 times, was overturn Obamacare. And he failed every time. And the reason he failed every time was because every time a congressman went home to their district, there was a town hall where people came out and said, don't get rid of Obamacare. Don't get rid of Obamacare. So reach out to your congressman. So make every election from now till 2028 a referendum on Trump, whether it's an interim election in Virginia or New Jersey or the midterms, and do what you can to ensure that folks get out and vote to save this country. If we do that, we will win. And if we don't, we won't. So I think we have one choice. I'm gonna give you one recommendation, and that is to watch. I should give you a recommendation for a book because we're here at a damn bookstore. But there's a lot of books here. They're all great. Buy at least one before you leave, preferably two. But watch The Fight. The Fight is a documentary that these very, very good documentary filmmakers made about the fight against Donald Trump the first time around, covering a bunch of ACLU cases, the case against family separation, the case against the attempt to skew the census, the case to deny women in federal custody access to abortion, the case to keep transgender people out of the military. And they came to us at the beginning, they said, we'd like to make a documentary about lawyers fighting, Trump. And I said, you know what lawyers do every day, right? It's gonna be a challenge. We sit in front of a computer and we type. And if it gets really exciting, we pick up the phone. But that's privilege, so you can't hear that. And then when we go into court, you can't bring a camera in the court. So, and they said, we can, I think we can make this a good document. They made an incredibly inspiring documentary about what happens when people stand up and fight. So it's streaming on all the services. Go home, it'll rile you up. And then support whatever group, is defending the rights that are under attack, whatever group is defending the rights that you value. That's what makes this country great. I don't think we have to make this country great. It is great because of the civil society institutions that we have.
So Sky, you're doing this glamorous legal work in the courts that we can watch on the documentary, but you're living it every day. So maybe you can give us a little bit of a preview of what's that like. And I'll note that Democracy Forward filed its first lawsuit against the Trump administration just minutes after he was sworn into office. And as I mentioned, yes. And as I mentioned earlier, you've filed more than 25 legal actions in the time since then. And that feels like a lot, and yet you've said it's just the beginning, right? You're just getting started, and there's so much more work to do. So what can we all do here to help support you in the work that's still to come and ensure that legal precedents, both those of times past, but also these new court rulings that you're securing every day, that they're actually enforced effectively?
Well, let me start by saying I cannot, of course, take credit for all of those suits. We have a tremendous team, and there is a tremendous team of lawyers at so many organizations, many of the ones that have been mentioned tonight. And I want you to know, lawyers sit at a computer, they pick up their phone. Our lawyers and the lawyers at so many organizations are truly working night and day. I will walk out of here and there'll be something else that has been filed. So this is real work that real people are doing because the stakes are so high for all of us. And we all have to do our part. You don't have to be a lawyer to do your part, but I just want you to know when you feel despair that there are people sitting, not seeing their families, working day in and day out, tapping in and tapping out, trying to have a little balance in the midst of it because the stakes are so high and because of what everyone means to this country and the fact that it's really important to be there on the front lines. So I just want to start with like that visual, which I do think I agree The Fight is a great documentary and you can kind of see how that plays out. I think there's a lot that people can do. My first ask is never to go read a legal brief or to show up to court, although we love to see you. Our lawyers love to see you, and we love the notes that you send because they help us get through the day. But it's really to create community and to be together. One of the things that we know about autocracies or about people that seek to wield power is they want you to feel alone. And they want you to feel isolated. And you can feel alone and isolated even in a big room like this. And you can feel alone and isolated even in a big courtroom or in a big office. And they want you to feel like that you're the only ones that care or that there's nothing that you can do. And that isolation, that lack of community, that despair is really the thing that is the greatest power tool that this administration, that Donald Trump could have. And so what we have to do every day is to build community together like you're doing tonight, to come together in new ways. We are doing that in our cases. We have a case right now against the anti-diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility orders, which is really just a case defending the First Amendment of the Constitution, because the president has said that if you don't agree with his view, his ideology, which by the way, they won't define what it is when they get into court. They can't define what it is. Then you should be penalized. And we've been able to get that struck down nationwide for now. But in that case, we're there on behalf of university professors and diversity officers. But we also have the Restaurant Opportunity Center, which are people that make wages in restaurants. And we have the city of Baltimore, all on the same case, all coming together because the First Amendment applies to all of us and our rights are equally available to all of us and need to be defended. That's the kind of community we need to be creating in this time. And so that's sort of my takeaway, is to create community. When you create community, you can find courage Courage isn't something you're just born with. It's something you have to practice. And it's something that's much easier to do when you have some people to go along with you. And so that's one of the things that we're really focused on at Democracy Forward. For those that want to support our work, you can, of course, visit our website and find ways to engage. And you can also visit a website called democracy2025.org, which actually has all of the organizations across the board that are doing this work every single day, because none of us can do it alone. So I hope that that leaves you some hope and that you're able to take that with you. And really, we believe that the creation of community, the ability to stand up, to be that civil society, that's what we need. And the lawyers are going to still work every single day to make sure that we're in court to defend our rights.
I think that point about community and resisting isolation is so important. And I do just want to give a shout out to Brad and Lissa and all of the Politics and Prose staff who made this happen, because I was reflecting on the drive over here that this is community in a way that is becoming, unfortunately, I think, increasingly rare to see, just people being able to come together in a space like this. And
if courts don't save us, bookstores will.
Yeah. There's more hope for you.
Definitely.
So I'm going to start taking questions from the audience if you want to start coming up to the microphones. Before I do that, I have one more question for Skye. You're doing, as you said, a lot of work. People are working around the clock. And I have to say, I'm sort of relieved that Congressman Raskin brought the topic of self-care up earlier, because I thought I was going to be the stereotypical millennial bringing up self-care right now. But I wanted to ask you, Skye, you've spoken a little bit about how you keep yourself grounded in these moments. And because we are in a bookstore, that poetry is actually one way that you do that. And we have two titles here tonight that you recommended. One is aptly called Staying Alive, Real Poems for Unreal Times by Neil Astley, and another book by one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver, American Primitive. So I was wondering if you could just share a little bit why you recommended those titles and how poetry, literature, or other forms of art can actually help us all support the work that we've talked about doing here tonight.
Well, this is such a bookstore answer, because I was a philosophy major, and one of my favorite philosophers was an American philosopher called Richard Rorty, who wrote in the American pragmatism tradition, which is one we need to be sort of focusing on in this time, one about agency and not being a spectator. Democracy is not a spectator sport. We need to have agency. And when he died, he was interviewed as he was at the end of his life. And people said sort of like, what do you wish you did more of? And his answer was to sort of read poetry more. And so when I read the interview, which of course Poetry Magazine I think published, but when I read the interview, I thought, well, that's a really good thing. So I started. I've always appreciated poetry, but I started really seeking to focus on it. It's also a very efficient way to have a little grounding moment, because you're not having to read the great American novel as you're doing it. And so I think Mary Oliver really grounds us in our common. She writes a lot about nature, and you can really be grounded in the things that are accessible to all of us. And she's a poet that really has brought, I think, poetry to all people, which is an ideal we want. And then the anthology that I recommended is one that a friend that was going through a hard time recommended for me. And it's just an anthology of great poetry for unreal times. And I do think we're sort of in an unreal time. So that's why I recommended those.
Great, wonderful. Okay, so I'll take one question from this microphone and then one from over here, and we can answer them together. Does that sound good to everyone? Okay, great. Valerie.
Hi, I just have a quick question for anybody who wants to answer it. I spend a couple hours each day in a panic that while all of this good work is being done, they've been planning this for 4 years, and as one of you said, they're following the playbook, the fascist playbook. So, are any of you concerned that there won't be elections in 2 years? And the second thing is, what do courts do when they don't comply?
Yes, and we can take your question as well.
Hi. Yeah, my name is Joanna Pratt. I live here in D.C. for the past 40, God, I don't know how many years. And I want to thank you all for talking to us. I've really learned a lot. It's good to see how many things are going on to fight Trump and the rest of his crew. But there's one that I find missing that nobody talked about. And I might be naive in asking this, but I'm just wondering, and Congressman Raskin, maybe you're the person to answer this because I know you're working on it. What do you believe that the members of the Democratic Party, DNC, however we define the Democratic Party, what are they doing? Do you feel as if they're able or going to be able to work together to come up with some way to fight Trump as the Democratic Party? I've seen all these other organizations, people, individuals like me and my friends trying to do something, and haven't heard much from the party.
Okay, so we have the question, what's the Democratic Party doing, or what can they be doing? What about elections of the future, and how can we make sure the legal judgments and the rule of law is being enforced? So does anybody want to start us off,
right.
Congressman Rath?
Okay, so let's see. I mean, we had elections during the Civil War. We had elections during World War II. You know, if they were to try to cancel these elections, I don't even know what the pretext would be for doing it, but we'd obviously be in a real constitutional emergency and a democratic emergency, and we would have to look at, I mean, you know, assuming that they're still in control of the House and the Senate and the White House, we would have to look at the massive kinds of actions that nonviolent, successful movements have taken in American history. We have to look at mass boycotts, general strikes, and things to, anything to force the issue to demonstrate that the vast majority of Americans are still on the side of constitutional democracy and against the authoritarians. That's what we would have to do. I mean, obviously, we would use every legal means at the same time to, you know, it is called for in the Constitution. It is mandatory. And again, we haven't missed any before. So, you know, what happens if, you know, this is the $64 billion question, or maybe it's $1 trillion question now. You know, what happens if we continue to win in court and we win, you know, on Professor Cole's optimistic scenario about the Supreme Court, we keep winning, and I think there's a lot of reason to think that we will on a number of issues, certainly on birthright citizenship. I mean, you got a Reagan judge saying this is the easiest case he's ever looked at. You know, you don't have to be a lawyer to understand it. You just have to know how to read. The first sentence of the 14th Amendment says that all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States. You know, and under the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. So, you know, put it this way, the traditional answer, the legalistic answer to that question is that's what civil contempt and criminal contempt citations are all about. We use contempt citations on the January 6th Select Committee, and I remember well our discussions, our debates about that, and bringing that forward to the floor of the House. The contempt citation, of course, would require the Department of Justice to be involved on the criminal side. But on civil contempt, it's within the unilateral power of the court to slap fines on people. I mean, you could, you know, if Elon Musk decides that he's above the law too, you could fine him $1 billion a day. You know, you could just keep fining him until he and his Doge compatriots comply. They can seize people's property, their bank accounts, and so on. So there's that. I don't like the suggestion that if they just say no, they get away with it. And so, again, if you press the hypothetical all the way to the end, then, you know, we've got to look at whatever international pressure can be brought in the situation. And, you know, I come back to the domestic popular pressure. On the question about the Democrats, and thank you for asking that, because I know that's on a lot of people's minds. I do have to say that we win elections. All my friends say, we won. And when we lose elections, it's like, what are the Democrats going to do about this, you know? But I will say, first of all, I believe all of my colleagues are absolutely, passionately committed to getting us through this nightmare, however we can. We have resolved ourselves into, our caucus is resolved into a rapid response working group. As the lead Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, my job is to work on the legal cases, on amicus briefs or interventions or cases of our own we could conceivably do, although there's very restrictive standing doctrines related to members of Congress going to court to try to enforce statutes. But there's a lot of stuff that we can do there, and I'll give you, one example of something I'm working on right now. The Privacy Act says that all of us have a proprietary legal interest in the data that the government has about us. And if Elon Musk and his minions have seized control over computers and gotten our data, then we've got the power to file a motion under the Privacy Act saying, I want to know, file it with Doge and say, I want to know exactly what data of mine you have in financial terms, IRS, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, college student loans. I want to know what's happened to that data, whether it's been diverted in any way, shared with any outside third-party source, and whether it's been altered or compromised in any way. And I'm going to be sending that in on Monday. I'm going to be putting it online, and I hope 340 million Americans do the exact same thing to demand to know. So, and I know a lot of Democrats are going to be with me in that process. So, but there's the legal side of it. Then we have members who are running our legislative strategy to make sure that they don't get away with anything that we can stop them on in the House and in the Senate. And in the Senate, obviously, we're depending on the filibuster for a lot of stuff. And then we have people who are out doing organizing and popular protest. And I'm, a volunteer working on that. I don't know how many people here have been to a rally so far, a protest. That's awesome. Okay, that looks like 2/3 of the people. I went today to the science rally. That was my 10th rally that I went to, and I spoke at that one. And I told them exactly what I said at the very first rally, representing Democrats from Maryland who came down, which is a rally a day keeps the fascists away, and I believe it.
I think what the Democrats need is a clear leader, and I nominate Congressman Raskin. I wanted to say one word on the Supreme Court, and people, and when I say this, people will dismiss me as just hopelessly naive and optimistic. But the Supreme Court has ruled against every president for 200 plus years, and every president has followed, and no president has sought to defy the order. Trump, as I said before, lost more cases last term around than any president before him except FDR, and he didn't even suggest defying any of those orders. When he was asked, will you abide by court orders, he said, yes, I abide by court orders. I appeal, but I abide by court orders. And what Vance said was courts don't have the right to interfere with legitimate executive action, which is true. If it's illegitimate, they do, and if it's legitimate, they don't, and they get to decide whether it's legitimate or illegitimate. But I just think it is a red line. To me, the best historical sort of thing that comes even close at all was FDR. FDR was a way more popular president than Trump at a much more difficult time in our history. The court was way less popular even than this court because it was striking down all these laws that were protecting people from big business, the Depression. And so FDR doesn't say, I'm not going to follow the court's orders. He says, I'm going to pack the court. I'm going to add some justices because they're obviously overworked because they're getting all these decisions wrong. And I'm going to put some younger justices on there I can pick. And even though people love FDR, they love what he's doing, and they hate what the court is doing, they would not let him pack the court. And that's, I think, a strong sign of how strong the notion of independence of courts is what our constitutional democracy relies on. When Netanyahu tried to undermine the independence of the courts, not defy the courts, but just change the rules for the courts in Israel, hundreds of thousands of people came out weekend after weekend after weekend. I think you'd see that here as well, and that's why I think he won't actually defy a court order. They're trying to bully the courts, just like they're trying to bully everybody else, but they won't actually defy a court order. But if they do, I'll be out there following Jamie protesting in the streets.
I want to let people ask. I would just say, I think it's the fact that you're having this conversation is not normal. But one thing that's happening in courts, and I want to give a shout out to our judges and want to give a shout out to the lawyers, is what's happening is we are going and winning orders. And then the government is sloppy. Sometimes they're sloppy because the Department of Justice doesn't know what their client's doing. Sometimes they're sloppy because it turns out you can't turn on and off federal funding like a light switch, like no one thought about that. And sometimes they're, maybe acting with some type of intent, but the lawyers are bringing that to the attention of the courts, and the courts, Trump judges that were appointed by President Trump, judges that were appointed by Republicans, judges that were appointed by Democrats, they're all uniformly being quite loud and quite clear that they expect their orders to be followed, and then we find that the government comes back into compliance. So that's actually what's happening right now, which may not be reassuring in terms of sort of what this means for people and communities, but it is quite reassuring in how the courts are standing up for their own constitutional power and how lawyers are using the courts to ensure that they're able to get the remedies that they're there to seek.
Great. And we'll take two more questions. I did just want to say one hopeful note on the voting and elections question, which is that there are incredible groups and leaders who have carried on Congressman Lewis's work to protect voting rights, and they're actually all gathering in Selma this weekend. So they may not be here, but they are out there doing this work, and you should look them up and support their work as well.
Thank you. So a very small number, a very small number of Republicans left the House to take positions in the administration. So there will be elections within the next couple of months. Did these Republicans who left, who gave up their seats, did they come from such overwhelmingly Republican districts that a Democratic candidate has no chance of winning?
Well, but I'd never say never. But I mean, we're talking about Lee Stefanik and Matt Gaetz and Mike Waltz, and these are all very Republican districts. But we've got strong Democratic candidates, and all of us are supporting them, with money and contributions. And a lot of us are going down to try to help campaign there and do whatever we can. So I would encourage everybody. I mean, and. First of all, you never know, right? I mean, when I first ran for office, I ran for state senate against a 32-year incumbent who was president pro tem of the Maryland Senate. And I ran on and abolish the death penalty and, restore voting rights to former prisoners and marriage equality, which Maryland didn't have yet. This was before Obergefell and all that. And I remember the Post had an article about it, quoting a pundit who said Raskin's chances of victory are considered impossible. And 9 months later, we got 67% of the vote. They had another article quoting a pundit who said Raskin's victory was inevitable. So you can go from impossible to inevitable because the pundits are never wrong, So I wouldn't count any of these people out. And by the way, even if you go from the last three races were won by Republicans by 20 points to they were won by 5 points there, that's a huge indicator and push for people around the country. And we're seeing magnificent activism breaking out all over America.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this has been great. I was a little disheartened, however, to hear accessibility only mentioned once, because I think people think that accessibility falls under DEI, and then it gets forgotten. So Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act is under attack by the states, and the behavior during the first term by this administration, the second term is showing up to be much the same. Just curious if any of you, besides Democracy Forward, are working on cases that involve those with disabilities and their rights. Thank you.
Well, I'm not there anymore, but the ACLU has a disability rights project that does incredible amount of disability litigation, did a huge amount of disability litigation during COVID, has done a huge amount of disability litigation around access to the ballot, a lot of disability work in prisons. ACLU is definitely out there, and there are a number of other groups as well.
There's a number of other groups, and one thing right now, I mean, there's certainly some of the orders call out accessibility, and we're in the courts, there are ACLUs in the courts, the unions are in the courts on that. But what we're seeing right now is a number of the policies that we're having to challenge and the actions that we're having to challenge, they may not call out accessibility, but there's of course a disproportionately negative impact on people with disabilities. And so that those stories and experiences and needs are taking center stage in a number of the cases that I've seen from a range of groups.
The only thing I would add is I think that also this is one of those areas where the hypocrisy of what's happening in this administration comes out. I don't know if anyone saw Governor Greg Abbott in Texas sign into place an Anti-Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Act from their state capitol. So another point of how these things are so intimately intertwined. You know, a lot of our work has been attacked because we work with corporations and have over the last 2 decades to create inclusive policies and workplaces for LGBTQ plus people. And oftentimes, even though companies are calling out that they're quote unquote not participating in our corporate equality index, the very next thing that they say is that they're not participating in disability index either, and then list all the other things that they're not going to do. So for me, I think that the interconnection here is truly profound and one that we have to talk about. And we need to be really saying what we are protecting when we're talking about disability rights. If you're a pregnant person at work, your rights are on the line right now. So we just need to make sure that we're also articulating the story of what's happening in a way where everyone sees how all of our rights are on the table.
But I'll just add, we're fighting hard in Congress to protect the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act and the IEPs all over the country. And, you know, people should understand they've got historically narrow margins. We were at 217 to 215. We just lost our colleague Sylvester Turner from Houston this week. So now it's 217 to 214. But you know, let your family members and your friends know in red districts all over the country, all we need to do is to pull over 1 or 2 Republicans, and they can't jam through Congress any of the stuff they want to do. There are 2 reasons why all of this is happening in this unilateralist, monarchical way by Elon Musk and Donald Trump. One is they believe in that, and they, you know, Musk, when you look at the Silicon Valley ideology, wants to move us to a techno-authoritarian state. If you look at this interview with Curtis Yarvin a month ago in the New York Times, he said the American people have to get over their fear of the word dictator. A dictator, he said, is just like a president and CEO of a corporation, and we need the same thing for the U.S. government, which reports, by the way, according to them, not to the people or the states, but to the corporations. So you pick the main corporate CEO guy, perhaps the richest person in the world, who otherwise wouldn't be able to run for president because he's from, you know, South Africa originally. But in any event, the point I was making, I got lost in my diatribe there. You only need 1 or 2. We only need 1 or 2 of them to pull them over. So one reason they're not coming in is because they believe in their monarchical ideology. But the other reason is they could never get this stuff through the House of Representatives or the Senate. They could never abolish the Agency for International Development or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Forget it. There'd be 15 or 20 Republicans who'd say, I don't even want to be seen anywhere near that bill because I'm going to go down. So you understand that they are usurping the lawmaking power of Congress, both because that's their ideology, but also because they could never get it through Congress. And people need to understand that. And it's going to only get worse for them in 2026 when we win 20 or 30 new Democratic seats in the House of Representatives.
These are wonderful questions, and I wish we could keep going all night, but I will take 2 more. So one from this mic and one from this mic, and then we will wrap up.
All right, I'll try to make it really good. Thank you all so much for everything that you're doing. Just wanted to ask, in order for us to build a movement, we all have to have a shared reality. And I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but the BBC did a story about how the Russian AI bots get a conspiracy theory out, and then Elon Musk retweets it, and all the people believe that, and they tell them, these people are going to fight for their rights in DC. Don't believe them. They're lying, and they're just trying to get everyone to own the libs. They're so excited about their own downfall. And I just don't see anyone in this room who's actually rooting for the downfall of America and is actually heartbroken because we're watching all these people, even the people who voted for Trump, get hurt over and over again, and they just think it's part of the plan. So what advice do you guys have to help break some of these people out of the bubble? I myself come from the state of Michigan, and I have a lot of people in my network who, let's just say, voted in both directions and care very deeply about the future of this country and making sure that they see Democrats and liberals and people who are American as other Americans and no longer as the enemy that Donald Trump has been trying to wash through this propaganda machine that he now has. What do we do about that?
Great.
Thank you.
For
That's an awesome question.
Oh, do you mind, for the sake of time, we just take this one and then we can get to both of them? Does that work? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much. This has been really, really thoughtful, and appreciate all of your perspectives. And maybe for the other half of the country, my question is, I've been really struck by not just the cowardice of the political leaders, but the cowardice across all of our civil institutions, right? You have, the AP being blocked out of the White House. There are no other news sites that are saying, well, we're going to walk out with them, right? You have research universities that are getting $400 million lost, and every university president is scared of the congressional hearings, and they're not standing up by their side and acting collectively. Every company that's faltering on DEI is doing it because they don't want to be the government contractor that loses out. And we don't have the ability right now to actually work in a collective way and have collective action. And I agree, everyone's scared, right? You talked about you have to actually step up and take risks, and we have to actually be willing to put ourselves on the line, our families on the line, our lives on the line. But it's a lot less scary to do that if we do it collectively. And so how do we get people to actually stop being protective and start being strategic, start reaching out at the leadership level, at our level, to actually build a collective approach? And how do we get people to see that it's even riskier not to act? Because if we don't act now, our lives are still on the line.
Well, I think these are two great related questions to end on, because how do we have a shared truth and a shared reality, and then how do we build upon that to come together and create these movements? So Congressman Raskin, I didn't mean to cut you off earlier, but would love to hear your thoughts, and anyone else who wants to share before we wrap up.
Yeah, those are two great questions. Let's start on the disinformation and the propaganda and the fake news versus the shared facts. And I think this is a critical point, because democracy was founded on the idea that people don't have to put up with the lies of rulers as our political fate. The First Amendment, the right to speak, is about the right to speak truth. People could always speak before, but either you had monarchs and lords speaking lies to people and people having to go along with it, or you had silence. But the idea of the First Amendment is people can actually speak truth, either objective truths or the truths of their own experience and the truths of their lives. So that's absolutely the case. I agree completely with the point. This will take, going to the other question, a lot of courage. Now, understand, courage is not the opposite of fear. I've come to learn a lot of the people who are acting most courageously feel a lot of fear, but they keep going. They push on because they've got collective solidarity and people behind them, and they know that people will stand with them. So your point is absolutely right. When people say, what can I do? Fundamentally, the point is create such strong bonds of solidarity and community that we'll be prepared for anything and we'll be ready to win in any situation. I mean, when I was a kid, my dad used to say to us, when everything looks hopeless, you're the hope. And so each one of us has got to be the hope for other people. And there are always people who have fewer resources than we do, financially or socially or politically, or you name it. Be the hope for those other people who help them out. Is this my last shot? Then I always love to quote the Democratic patriots who keep me going, and so I want to quote two quickly. One is the great Marylander Frederick Douglass, who was born, just 45 minutes away at the Wye River Plantation into slavery and escaped to become our great freedom fighter through the Civil War and Reconstruction. And he said, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. And the struggle may be moral, it may be physical, it may be moral and physical, but there must be struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. There's the great Frederick Douglass, and I'll leave you finally with Tom Paine, who believed very much in the idea that the struggle for democracy is the struggle for facts, is the struggle for truth and people's access to government. And he came over in 1774, 2 years before the Revolution, to fall in love with America. And he said, if this nation lives up to its ideals, it will become an asylum to humanity, he said. Not an insane asylum, mind you, but a place of refuge for people seeking freedom from political and religious repression all over the world. And he wrote Common Sense, which ignited the American Revolution. You know, George Washington had the troops reading Common Sense by campfire at Valley Forge. But 1776 was a tough year. This country was split right down the middle. There's an interesting book about this by a Texas historian, R.W. Brand, called The First Civil War, the American Revolution being the first Civil War. But half of the people were just saying you can't beat kings and queens and monarchs and rulers and plutocrats and, you know, the whole thing. And the other half saying, yeah, it's true, people have always lived that way, but let's gamble on something different. Democratic self-government and the freedoms of the people. So anyway, Paine wrote this pamphlet called The American Crisis in 1776 to give people hope and courage that we could get through a very, very tough winter. And so I'm just going to update these words pursuant to instructions from Nancy Pelosi, who said Paine was a feminist, and that he was, so he wouldn't mind. So he said, these are the times that try men and women's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink at this moment from the service of their cause and their country. But everyone that stands with us now will win the love and the favor and the affection of every man and every woman for all time. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation. The more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end will be our victory. Let's make that victory ours. Thank you, Politics and Prose.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking all of our wonderful panelists for sharing their thoughts. And before you go, just one request on behalf of the Politics and Prose event staff who will be closing up. If you could please fold up your chair and lean it against a wall or a bookshelf, and we will come collect them. So thank you, and thank you to everybody here for being here and giving us all hope in a crowded room tonight. So.